Spin Selling by Neil Rackham. Let me paint you a picture. It's a freezing January night, and a train screeches to an unexpected stop, trapped in dense fog. Inside one of the compartments, two strangers sit across from each other. One is a young researcher launching his consulting business. The other? A salesman who looks absolutely crushed. The salesman leans forward and confesses something that's been eating him alive. I used to be a top performer at my last company, but now I can't seem to do anything right. Here's the thing. This guy wasn't just good at his old job. He was number 3 out of 200 salespeople. A genuine rock star selling low-priced products. Then he switched companies to sell expensive, complex machine tools, and after an entire year, he'd sunk to dead last. With desperation in his voice, he asked a question that would literally reshape the entire sales profession. How can you crush it at one sales job and completely bomb at another? The young researcher had nothing for him, not yet anyway. But that question ignited something in his mind. That researcher was Neil Rackham, and he was about to embark on a 12-year odyssey, spending over $1 million to lead the most extensive sales research project in history. His team at Huthwaite dove into over 35,000 sales calls across 23 countries. They weren't chasing theories or hunches. They wanted raw data. What do the world's best salespeople actually do when the stakes are sky high? The book we're diving into today, Spin Selling, is Rackham's answer to that desperate salesman's question. This isn't your typical bag of sales tricks. It's a science-backed revolution in how selling actually works. Today, more than half of the world's top 100 industrial companies use this method to train their people. I'm going to walk you through the surprising, sometimes shocking secrets that Rackham and his team discovered. By the time we're done, you'll understand the massive difference between selling something simple and selling something significant. You'll have a powerful framework that can completely transform how you persuade, influence, and connect with people, not just in sales, but anywhere building value and trust matters. This isn't about manipulation tricks. It's about understanding the deep psychology behind how people make important decisions. So where did Rackham start this massive project? Well, like most people, his first move was obvious. Find the top performers and ask them their secrets. Makes perfect sense, right? Learn from the best to become the best. But he quickly stumbled onto something fascinating and incredibly frustrating. Top performers usually have no clue what makes them so effective. They operate on instinct, without conscious thought. Rackham tells this brilliant story about his research team trying to crack the code of what made certain customs officers so good at catching smugglers. They interviewed 23 of the best agents, and 18 gave the exact same advice. It's all in the eyes. Look into people's eyes and you can see the guilt. So they actually set up training sessions where officers stared intensely into each other's eyes, searching for signs of guilt. As you'd imagine, it was awkward as hell and completely useless. Only when they stopped asking and started watching, using hidden cameras, did they discover the truth. The successful officers weren't hunting for guilt. They were spotting signs of control. A guilty person overcompensates trying to look innocent, creating subtle tells like unnaturally straight posture or tense neck muscles. The experts' own advice was dead wrong. This was huge. Rackham realized you can't learn a skill just by interviewing experts. You have to watch them in action. And that's exactly what his team did for the next decade. They became flies on the wall in thousands of sales calls, meticulously tracking every single behavior. They used behavior analysis, coding over 116 different actions to see which ones showed up more often in successful calls versus failures. What they found completely demolished everything sales training had been teaching. For decades, sales training rested on a few sacred pillars, repeated in practically every book and seminar. Rackham's research didn't just challenge them. It proved that in large, complex sales, these pillars were actually sabotaging success. Let's start with the holiest of holies, closing. Classic sales wisdom preached always be closing. Trainers taught dozens of slick techniques: the assumptive close, where you act like the customer already agreed; the alternative close, asking whether they prefer delivery Tuesday or Thursday; the standing room only close, creating fake urgency. The gospel said you should attempt to close at least 5 times in every call. Rackham was fascinated and fully expected his research to validate this. But the data told a completely different story. In one revealing experiment, they studied salespeople in a chain of photo shops. These sellers worked one day at a counter selling cheap stuff like film, and the next day they'd sell expensive cameras and video equipment. Perfect setup to test how closing techniques performed as the decision size changed. After training the salespeople in classic closing techniques, here's what happened. When selling low-value items, using more closes actually worked. It accelerated transactions and boosted sales slightly. But when those exact same people, using those exact same techniques, moved to the high-value counter, the results were catastrophic. Their success rate plummeted from 42% down to 33%. The more they used closing techniques on expensive items, the less likely they were to make the sale. Why? Because a major sale isn't a single event. It's building a long-term relationship. A hard close creates pressure. Sure, you might pressure someone into buying a roll of film, but you can't pressure them into a $100,000 decision. The bigger the decision, the harder people push back against pressure. Professional buyers, the gatekeepers of major sales, see these techniques for what they really are: manipulative games. It destroys the professional respect and trust you're trying to build. The conclusion was crystal clear. In major sales, classic closing techniques don't just fail to help. They actively tank your chances of success. The second myth Rackham's research obliterated was objection handling. Sales training had always obsessed over handling objections. Traditional wisdom claimed objections signaled customer interest, and the more you got, the better. So they taught salespeople clever ways to counter, rephrase, and overcome every possible objection. But Rackham's team noticed something intriguing. Inexperienced salespeople got bombarded with objections. Top performers, they got hardly any. This directly contradicted the old wisdom. Turns out, objections weren't a success sign. They were a failure sign from earlier in the conversation. The goal shouldn't be mastering objection handling. It should be preventing them in the first place. So what was causing all these objections? To understand this, we need to look at how salespeople traditionally talk about products. They use what are called features and advantages. A feature is just a product fact. This car has a 2-liter engine. An advantage shows how that feature helps. The 2-liter engine gives you faster acceleration. Most sales programs call these benefits and tell you to pile them on. But here's the problem. Imagine a seller says, "Our word processor would eliminate that retyping for you." That's an advantage. But the buyer's thinking, "Sure, we do some retyping, but I'm not paying $15,000 just for that." And boom, objection. The objection wasn't really about the product. It was about value. The seller offered a solution to a problem that didn't feel significant enough to the customer. The more advantages you throw out, the more objections you create. You're treating symptoms, not causes. The real cause of most objections is offering solutions too early, before you've built up the problem's value. So if closing doesn't work and objection handling is just a band-aid, what does work? Rackham found the answer in the most overlooked part of the sales call: the investigating stage. Almost every sales call breaks down into 4 stages. Preliminaries, the opening; investigating, where you ask questions; demonstrating capability, presenting your solution; and obtaining commitment, agreeing on next steps. Rackham's research proved, beyond any doubt, that success in a major sale depends more than anything on how you handle the investigating stage. For decades, the only real guidance on questioning was distinguishing between open and closed questions. A closed question gets a simple yes or no, while an open question needs a longer answer. The theory said open questions were more powerful. Rackham's team tested this. They counted open and closed questions in thousands of calls. What they found was shocking. There was zero measurable relationship between using open questions and success. Some top performers used almost no open questions. Others used nothing but. It made no difference. The entire foundation of questioning skills, taught for over 50 years, was essentially worthless for predicting success in major sales. This is where Rackham and his team had their biggest breakthrough. It wasn't the question format that mattered, it was the purpose. And the purpose of questions in a major sale, they discovered, is uncovering and developing customer needs. Here's the key. Needs in small sales differ from needs in big ones. When you buy a candy bar, your need develops in about 2 seconds. But a major purchase, like a new computer system for your company, involves needs that develop slowly, over months or even years. Rackham's team made a crucial distinction. They split needs into 2 types, implied needs and explicit needs. An implied need is a statement of a problem, difficulty, or dissatisfaction. The customer saying, "I'm unhappy with our waste rates," or "our current system's a bit slow." An explicit need is a strong statement of want or desire. The customer saying, "We need a faster system," or "What we're looking for is a more reliable machine." Now here's the $1,000,000 secret. In small, simple sales, uncovering implied needs is enough for success. The more problems you find, the more likely you make a sale. But in large, complex sales, there's zero relationship between the number of implied needs you uncover and your success. Finding problems doesn't matter. What matters is what you do with them. The master salesperson's goal is taking those small, nagging implied needs and developing them, building them up until they become powerful, urgent, explicit needs. How do they do that? With a specific sequence of questions. This is the heart of Rackham's discovery, the legendary SPIN model. SPIN is an acronym for 4 types of questions, used in logical sequence to develop customer needs. It starts with S, situation questions. These ask about facts and background. What equipment are you using now? How many people do you employ? They're necessary for understanding context. But Rackham's research showed they have a slightly negative relationship with success. Why? Because they bore the customer. They only benefit the seller. Successful salespeople ask them sparingly, doing homework beforehand, and only asking what's essential. Once they have context, they move to P, problem questions. These explore problems, difficulties, and dissatisfactions. Are you satisfied with your present equipment? What are the disadvantages of how you're handling this now? These questions are the raw material of a sale. They uncover implied needs. In small sales, this is often enough. But in major sales, you're just getting started. This is where less successful salespeople screw up. They hear a problem and immediately jump in with a solution. But master salespeople hold back. They know the problem isn't big enough yet. So they move to the third and most powerful question type, I, implication questions. Implication questions explore the consequences or effects of a problem. They take a small problem and probe its impact, making it bigger, more serious, and more urgent. This skill, more than any other, separates great salespeople from average ones. Let's look at a brilliant example from the book. A seller's talking to a buyer about some machines. The seller asks a problem question. Are they difficult for your operators to use? The buyer replies with a small, implied need. They're rather hard, but we've learned how to get them working. An average seller would now offer a solution. But the spin seller starts asking implication questions. You say they're hard to use. What effect does that have on your output? The buyer admits it can create bottlenecks if an operator leaves. The seller digs deeper. It sounds like the difficulty of using these machines may be leading to a turnover problem. Is that right? The buyer starts seeing the problem grow. Yes, people certainly don't like using them, and operators generally don't stay with us long. The seller keeps going, what does that turnover mean in terms of training cost? Suddenly the buyer's calculating thousands of dollars in wasted training. The seller asks about overtime costs covering the bottlenecks, about frustration sending work outside and dealing with late deliveries. By the end of this chain of implication questions, the buyer's tiny problem, they're rather hard to use, has transformed into a massive business crisis involving tens of thousands of dollars, production bottlenecks, and operator dissatisfaction. The buyer concludes, when you put it that way, those machines are creating a very serious problem indeed. See the magic here? The seller didn't tell the buyer the problem was serious. He asked questions that helped the buyer discover the seriousness himself. The solution's value just skyrocketed, not because the product changed, but because the problem's perception changed. But there's one final step. Implication questions are powerful, but they're somewhat negative. They focus on pain and problems. To shift the conversation to a positive, solution-oriented place, successful salespeople use the fourth question type. N. Need-payoff questions. Need-payoff questions ask about the value, usefulness, or utility of a solution. They get the customer focusing on the payoff. How would that help you? What would be the advantages of solving this problem? Is there any other way this could help? The psychology here is brilliant. Instead of the seller listing benefits, need-payoff questions get the customer telling you the benefits. For example, after uncovering the pain of training costs, the seller might ask, "So, if you had a machine that was easier to use and could cut down on that operator turnover, what would that allow you to do?" The customer might reply, "Well, we could save over $25,000 a year, and our production would be much more reliable." The customer is now selling themselves on the solution. Even better, this process rehearses them for when they have to sell the idea to others inside their own company. They're now armed not with your product features, but with a clear understanding of how the solution solves their business problems. This brings us full circle. Once you've masterfully used the spin sequence to build a clear and urgent explicit need, the final two stages of the call become incredibly simple. When it's time for demonstrating capability, you don't spew a list of features or advantages. You present a benefit. And Rackham has a very specific and powerful definition for it. A true benefit is a statement showing how your product or service meets an explicit need the customer has expressed. The customer says, "We need to reduce our training costs." You reply with a benefit. "Our EasyFlow system will meet that need for you because it's so simple to operate that it cuts training time by 80%. It's a perfect fit. And because it meets a need the customer already feels strongly, it doesn't create objections. It creates approval." Finally, obtaining commitment. You don't need tricky closing techniques. A customer who desperately wants a solution doesn't need to be closed. They need to be guided. The successful seller does three simple things. First, they check if any concerns remain. Second, they summarize the benefits just discussed. Third, they don't, quote, ask for the order. They propose a commitment. They suggest a realistic, logical next step, moving the sale forward. Then could I suggest that the most logical next step would be for you and your accountant to come and see one of these systems in operation? It's not a push. It's a helpful suggestion. You're not closing a sale, you're opening a relationship. This, in essence, is the powerful, research-backed strategy of spin selling. It's a journey beginning not with your product, but with the customer's world. It starts with situation questions to understand their context, moves to problem questions to uncover their difficulties, uses implication questions to make those difficulties feel significant, and finally uses need-payoff questions to let the customer discover the light at the end of the tunnel. It's a process of co-creation, where you and the customer build the solution's value together. When you truly step back and look at what Neil Rackham achieved with spin selling, it's more than just a sales methodology. It's a fundamental shift in how we think about persuasion and influence. For decades, selling was portrayed as an adversarial game, a battle of wits, where the seller used clever tactics to get the customer to buy. It was about pushing products, handling objections, and closing deals. Rackham's research reveals a more profound and, frankly, more ethical path. It transforms the salesperson from product pusher into problem solver, from tactician into trusted advisor. The spin model isn't a set of tricks to manipulate someone into a decision. It's a framework for genuine curiosity. It's about having the discipline to understand before trying to be understood. The most powerful lesson in this book, for me, is the idea that you can't convince people of anything. All you can do is ask the right questions that allow them to convince themselves. When you ask an implication question, you aren't telling the customer their problem is expensive. You're guiding them to that conclusion on their own. When you ask a need-payoff question, you aren't telling them how great your solution is. You're creating space for them to articulate its value in their own words. This is persuasion at its most powerful because it respects the other person's intelligence and autonomy. It builds trust, not resistance. In a world noisier and more skeptical than ever, where buyers are more educated and have more choices, the hard sell tactics of the past aren't just ineffective, they're obsolete. The principles of spin selling, building value, understanding needs, and creating collaborative solutions are more relevant today than when the book was first written. This approach builds lasting customer relationships and turns transactions into partnerships. So how can you start putting this into practice today? Let me offer 3 simple actions. First, before your next important conversation, whether with a client, a boss, or even a family member, stop thinking about what you're going to say. Instead, spend 10 minutes thinking about what you're going to ask. Write down one potential problem they might be facing. Then brainstorm 3 implication questions related to that problem. What are the consequences? The ripple effects. Finally, write down one need-payoff question. How would solving that problem help them? This simple planning exercise will fundamentally shift your focus from telling to asking. Second, for the next week, focus on one single behavior from this book. Don't try mastering everything at once. Maybe you decide to simply ask more problem questions. Just get comfortable asking people about their difficulties and dissatisfactions. Don't worry about perfection. As Rackham says, focus on quantity before quality. Do it often enough, and quality will take care of itself. Third, listen to yourself. In your next conversation, pay attention to the balance of talking versus listening. Are you jumping in with solutions the moment you hear a problem? If so, just notice it. The first step to changing any behavior is becoming aware of it. Spin selling is more than a book. It's a new way of thinking. It's a reminder that the most effective way to influence others isn't by having the best answers, but by asking the best questions. That was a summary of Spin Selling by Neil Rackham. We've certainly covered the big ideas today, but a summary is like looking at a map of a beautiful country. It gives you the layout, but can't give you the feeling of walking the streets, smelling the air, and meeting the people. The true power of this book is in the details, the dozens of real-world examples, and how the ideas build on one another. This summary is your map, to help you see if this is a journey you want to take. If anything we've discussed has sparked your curiosity or made you rethink your own approach, I truly encourage you to pick up a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning tactics. It's about fundamentally changing how you see your role in any conversation where value is being created. A link to the book is in the description below. Also, if you've found this journey valuable, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It lets me know these deep dives are helpful and ensures you won't miss our next exploration into another transformative book that has shaped the minds of the world's most successful people. Let's keep learning and growing together.